Awesome, thank you. Well, welcome to the Learning Bars webinar, Building Leadership Capacity, Leveraging Data to Drive Literacy Improvements. My name is Karen Power, and we're so happy that you're able to join this afternoon or this morning. Good morning for those of you on the West Coast. We're so happy to have participants always in our webinars. And my little Addison here says welcome and thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. For those of you I have not met or have not worked with, I've worked in New Brunswick for most of my professional career. I was a school teacher, then a vice principal, principal for 5 years at Louisville Middle School. The picture's here. It was probably my favorite job of all jobs when I was principal. And then I became superintendent in the same school district and did that work for 10 years before going out and consulting and doing some leadership coaching, consulting work, and had the absolute pleasure to co-author a few books with a good friend of mine, Jeannie Spiller, and a few other authors as well. So I've been doing a lot of leadership coaching and primarily working with the Learning Bar the last few years. So this afternoon, I'm going to help you think through just a few pieces around how much stronger our leadership work is when we focus on the evidence and the data. So we really want to look at exploring the use of data, really understanding that collaborative data and what it looks like when we have good discussions as a winning strategy. So this afternoon, we also have a guest with us. Steve Dayton's here from Manitoba, and he's a very successful principal who's going to talk about his use of data. And I know he will not like that I described him that way, but I've worked with Steve for a few years, and his ability to have great data discussions has been a winning strategy for him at his school. So we're going to talk with a practitioner today about what that looks like. And then I want you to think about that reciprocal accountability as leaders and teachers. So whether you're a teacher joining us this afternoon, and welcome, or a school leader, district leader, division leader, there is that reciprocal accountability where we can't ask accountability of others if we're not willing to take that step ourselves. So there's always that, you know, kind of holding up the mirror piece where we have to think about if we're asking others to be responding to evidence, and we need to be sure we're on top of it as well. And we have a good understanding of what the story in that evidence is. So for the next 40 minutes or so this afternoon, we're going to have a little look at that. This is really just to build a little bit of maybe awareness or some reminders. Sometimes this time of the school year, it's nice to just take a breath and do a little professional learning for yourself and really have an opportunity to reflect on your own practices. So I know from the names joining, I see a lot of really interested participants who have done other PD with us, but also know there's some new folks who perhaps are new to administration or in a teaching position right now. We'd love to hear about where you are from and what you do. So if you want to fill up the chat, just perhaps saying hello and your position and where you live right now, where you're working, that would be great to give us a good sense of who's participating today. So those are the three key points that we're going to focus on. So I always start with a little research, and I wanted to start this afternoon with Dr. Doug Reeves' research around combining the focus on evidence with our leadership and learning piece. So Dr. Reeves in 2006 described this matrix and then updated a little bit in 2020, but he talks about the two things that have to happen with our data. He talks about us having effect data and cause data. So when we have cause data, or we think about the causes that change our data, it's really those practices in teaching and learning and teaching and leadership that are going to drive a change. And so then we get those effect pieces where we see student achievement change, we see really great results. So Dr. Reeves always talks about all schools fit into 4 quadrants. We can be a lucky school where we're getting great results. We don't really know why. Perhaps we're in really strong demographics. We have strong teachers, we have strong leaders, but really it's just kind of happened. We haven't strategically gone out to set our school improvement plans in place. We haven't done anything different, but we're getting the results, and we're just not sure we would know how to sustain that perhaps as we move forward. He talks about losing ground schools, which are the schools that get low results and really do not understand what the right work might be. So they don't really have a good sense of those practices that are going to change the evidence, those practices that are going to cause change. And those schools stay a little stuck or a lot stuck. And it's really tough when you think about school improvement work, it's really tough to move those schools. A learning school might have low results, but there is an understanding of what the right work is. And so typically when we work in school improvement work, we work to get all schools over at least to that learning quadrant to begin with. And when we get there, sometimes it feels a little frustrating to teachers and to leaders because the data is not changing as quick as the work is. So we're asking people to work differently. We're teaching new strategies. We're building leadership practices, but perhaps enough time hasn't been put into it yet for you to see the results. And so that evidence isn't collecting fast enough, and it can feel a little frustrating. When you stick with it, though, we get to move up to that leading quadrant where we want all schools to be. And in that leading quadrant, we're getting great results and we understand the work. So we have a good understanding of how to get the right evidence. We understand how to use our data. We know what good literacy instruction, for example, looks like. We're building on those really great practices, and then we know we can sustain that. So today we really want to think, and I would like you to reflect on how do you get to be in that leading quadrant? What kinds of pieces might be missing or need tweaking to really push your school improvement work towards that leading quadrant? So as we know, there's lots of data. There's data everywhere we look right now. We see, you know, too much data lots of times, or too many factors for us to try to figure out what's real, what's not real, what's the story in the data, what evidence do we really need to work from. And when we don't really have a good sense of what data is the data we need, then we start looking at just opinions, and we have to be very careful about that. And so as our school improvement work continues, we always want to be building our practices on solid evidence and really understanding how that data piece and that evidence is driving our decisions. So again, back to Dr. Reeves, he talks about evidence versus experience. And so when we think about it this way, we're not saying that we don't we don't build on our experiences. We know that great teaching comes a lot of times just from really good practice, from building your expertise, from having experiences. So we're never discounting that. But it really is what Dr. Reeves is really referring to is that we have to lean towards that evidence and not hope that something's going to work, but really know that we have evidence and we can progress monitor our work, and we know that we can see the data changing. And so we really want to look at how we do that. So one of the books that I co-authored with Jeannie Spiller, Leading with Intention, we talk about a lot about Dr. Reeves' 6 levels of evidence. And he talks us through, and we write about that he really moves us from understanding what we, have opinions about to experiencing things to building more of that evidence. As we experience, we start to collect more evidence of what's working. And then we just continue to build into more practices around observing to collect evidence. And then we have more and more, clear facts about something that leads us to really know for sure. And in the world of school improvement, this sounds and looks like we have really good evidence of what students know and do not know. So we're really getting more and more clear about what we have for evidence of student learning and what we really are struggling with. So when we work from evidence, and especially in our school improvement work, we can start to celebrate those small and big wins. So we want to have good use of our data. We want to be able to pull from the data the successes and the challenges, but we really need to know what that current reality is. So we work from the data, we look at the right student data to really start to see what the good and not so good is. So where are students struggling? Where are they really successful? And it helps us to truly think about the data student by student and skill by skill. And so you're going to hear that this afternoon, that all the progress monitoring we currently do, especially in early literacy work, we're really trying to drill down to student by student, skill by skill. So where does a student successfully, what can they do really successful? How are they doing in decoding? What are the phonemes they're missing? We want to get to those small specific skills so we can definitely change or plan our instruction around that, build our interventions, and move forward with very specific evidence. And of course, having that ability to work from evidence, and I'm sure all of you know this, but it helps us set goals. So we can start to really see what that end goal is. Where do you want to have your students be at the end of June? Where do we want to be at the end of March? What are those short-term and long-term goals? And now how are we going to progress monitor that work? So really setting ourselves up for success by using data, using the right data, but using it as frequently as we need to so we can be sure that we're working towards that end goal, whatever those goals are. When we do not focus on evidence, here are some missed opportunities we have to think about. And so I want you to think about the times when you were not sure if you understood the successes and needs of students. And I can think of lots of times in my career where I just didn't have the right data. So I might have been hoping I was figuring things out. I might have been, kind of going by my experiences or trying, best to make the best decisions for students, but I might not have had the right data to do that with. So really thinking about ways that you can collect solid evidence that's going to help you know those successes and understand the needs of students. Another missed opportunity for sure is when we don't really tap into the teacher expertise. So I find when we get better and better at using evidence, we also have a stronger chance to have those rich conversations with teachers about what did you do really well in your classroom that gave you that great data. Can you help me share that expertise with another teacher? So those collective efficacy pieces where teachers can have the confidence they did well with their instructional plan, they can share that plan. If we're not paying attention to that data and that evidence, we sometimes can miss those opportunities to see really great instruction and to see really good success. We want to build collective ownership of student learning. So most of my work is done around that collaborative team piece about, building shared ownership, helping build capacity so leaders, teachers, division leaders, district leaders, everybody who's on here right now, that we build more and more of that collective ownership. So it's not my students, but they're our students. It isn't, your job to teach that student. It's our job to help that student learn. So through the evidence of, having a good understanding what the data is telling us, we see more and more chances to build that into our practice. And then obviously we want to continue to build a good understanding of what school improvement means. So when we talk about school improvement, sometimes that triggers a memory, let's say, of writing a school improvement plan. I don't know how many here have lived through the practice of having to write very big, daunting school improvement plans, and perhaps those plans never truly um, took action, right? They became a document that perhaps stayed in a closet or was on your desk or on your computer, but really didn't become that action plan for you. So the more times we go back to our data and we have a good look at student evidence, the evidence of what's working and what is not working, we're able to write better school improvement practice plans or action plans to really get the work done. So we want to continue to think about what is the evidence telling us that's going to move our school forward. And truly, who really misses out is the students. I think it goes without saying that everybody here is here for students, and we're all, working to that common goal wherever you are, that we really truly want to build on student capacity. So we have opportunities where when we don't pay attention to evidence, there is not the chance to build that intentional instructional plan. We might miss the opportunity to have really targeted interventions. We prevent that collective problem solving to bubble up because we really haven't paid attention to the data. So there are so many things that we know when we get into a good practice of being evidence driven, to looking through the data, to getting to, deep conversations around root cause. Why is a student not learning? What is causing that one skill to be the one that they're stuck on? What can we do different? All those conversations will create more opportunities for our students. And in the end, that's what our school improvement work really is about. So as leaders here and as teachers joining as well, we know that there are opportunities for us to truly change our conversations. And when I think about the schools I currently work with, one of the things that really inspires me to keep working is really being able to see that conversations change. So we see teachers understanding perhaps how their use of data is changing what they see and plan in a classroom. We see how the use of data is helping principals feel more clarity around what's happening in their schools. We understand that, sometimes facing current reality, knowing that there are gaps in our learning that we're seeing in our data, that's not really a negative thing. It's just we have to know that. We have to be super honest with ourselves as leaders, and we do need to know what's in that data. So part of leading change is always about changing the conversations, getting better and better at helping others understand how those conversations sound. So one of the things I wanted to show you, and I'm going to invite Steve into the conversation because I think you'll learn more from Steve than anyone else here today. But this is just a quick sampling of an early literacy assessment tool that we use to give leaders and teachers really good data about where students are at. And so it is a phonics assessment. And we do start, and Steve will show you a little bit more from some of his data, but we have phase 1, 2, and 3. So I just pulled this from phase 1. So as we go through the early literacy work with students, the teachers are working wherever the students come in at baseline, they're working from that challenge and working towards getting to 25. So what we wanted to do as we were building, science of reading, building really good reading instructional plans, we wanted to make sure we were giving every teacher and every leader the opportunity to have good data to understand exactly what the students could do and what the students cannot do. So we're trying very hard to make sure the data is very clear and it's very specific. And the more the students are progress monitored, obviously, the more that story is going to come out. So we're going to know what the students can and cannot do. So I just wanted you to see how specific that we're talking about. So when I think about the use of evidence in a school, I try to help principals see where they can find specific details or where they can dig deep enough into their data to get to root cause. So with our early literacy work, we really want to see exactly the skills the students can do and what that progression of learning is going to look like as they move forward. So this is just a snapshot of what phase 1 looks like, and definitely the way the data is reported out when teachers do the progress monitoring. And so this is a sample of what that data collection starts to become. And I'm just, again, preloading this or front loading this. So when Steve speaks to you about his own school, you'll have a sense of the data that he's been working from. But this is a sample school division. We would be looking again, if that was phase 1, where you just saw the merging bronze, silver, gold, and platinum were those 25 challenges. There's 5 in each of these levels. And then we would see from the baseline, we want to see this current one get smaller, and we want to see the rest of them move up. And so providing the leaders with 2 things, and I think when you think about what data do you have currently that you can use, you want to have big picture data, but you want to have those specific pieces. So the specific pieces of data for example, I showed you on the previous screen where you can actually see skill by skill, is going to help the teacher the most. And is going to help you as a leader have really good instructional conversations with teachers. But as a leader and a division leader, district leader, we're always also looking for big picture data pieces. So where are we, seeing the patterns? Where are we seeing places perhaps we're getting stuck? Where are we not seeing students move? Are there things that we need to address in terms of, professional learning for teachers? Are there places where we know that teachers have not had enough practice in instruction and specific skills? So those big picture data pieces are just as important as those root cause pieces that you see when you do specific skill by skill. And both, I think, are very valuable in our use of evidence-based planning as a school leader. So I'm just going to zip through a couple of these and want to get to, as I said, get to Steve. So one of the things that I'll tell you about Steve Dayton, who I'm going to introduce you to in a second, is that he has shown us what really great leadership looks like when you can lead data conversations. And I think when I think of Steve's school, I think of the opportunities I've had to have calls with him where he's described the data conversations he's had with teachers. And so I always think about these 6 bullets when I think about what does it take to kind of get to a place where you feel really confident in the conversations you're having. And I think one of the things definitely is that we're practicing that focus. So it's teacher by teacher, student by student. We're not overwhelmed by our data, but we're trying to narrow down to something we can really see a pattern in. Or we're looking at 5 specific students, or we're looking at it teacher by teacher. So we're really trying to do it in a more focused way, and then setting the conversation for really strong respect and flexible conversations where teachers feel safe and they feel like there's an open environment there built on trust. One of the things that you may know if you've run into this, but it can cause data conversations can cause some vulnerability, some feelings of insecurity for some teachers, and some teachers are not comfortable sharing out their data or wanting to talk about it. So we really have to work on that environment of trust first. And then building on the successes, as I said earlier, seeking first to understand what's in the data before you are, as the leader, trying to lead from, a conversation that perhaps isn't as clear to others. And then obviously providing structure. So maybe having some guiding questions with you, an agenda, protocol, something that helps you kind of set up for success. And then lastly, making sure that that conversation leads to something else. So it should lead to some next steps through your SMART goals, progress monitoring, and whatever works best in your situation. So right now it's my pleasure. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can introduce you to Steve and see him myself, and then I'll go ahead and put some more slides up for him. So Steve, do you want to just say hello there now, and we'll make
Sure.
sure.
Hello to everyone. Really appreciate being here, and thanks to Karen for inviting me and the probably overly kind welcome that you gave me.
So Steve, I'm just going to go back to your school, and I don't know if you want to tell them a little bit about it while I'm pulling up
Sure.
a couple slides for you that you need.
Okay. Well, I'll a little personal introduction. So I began my teaching career in 2001, and I've been the admin and a teaching principal here at Joseph H. Kerr since 2012. Um, we're a nursery to grade 12 school in northern Manitoba. We are considered remote, but definitely not isolated. We're very connected. And we service about 155 students all the way from nursery to 12. And this is our 4th year working with Karen and the Learning Bar in early literacy program for our school. And it has been, I have to say, it has been very successful over those 4 years. So Karen had asked very generally for me to talk about how we use data in our school. And I have a few pages of notes that you might see me looking at, but I'll start off by saying that we use it lots of ways. So data is collected for divisional purposes, It's collected for school, overall school purposes. But mostly what I would like to maybe focus on today is how we use it at the teacher level, classroom level, where it really supports instruction for students. That's where this particular type is most effective. So to begin with, when we began the program, when you're tracking student performance is what it looks like, we made it very clear that this is a non-evaluative tool for teachers. It's not teacher performance based. So to make the data friendly and, like if the student isn't moving, it's not necessarily reflective of, a teacher that isn't working or trying or anything like that. So it's certainly not performance based that way. It's student information based and student progress based, focusing on what is working for the student and the classroom and maybe what is not, and then updating the practice to make the most gains.
Steve,
Um,
just
yeah,
on the screen, I'm not sure if you can see it. I do have your current, your data that shows your balloons, not the classroom data yet, but I do have your
okay.
balloons up. And I don't know if you want to just say something about, how, I guess, how you've moved from emerging up through those phases, and maybe a little bit about where you've set some goals around that.
Okay, sure. Um, so when we first began, the first time we ran our students through the Para 1 assessment, we were about 70% of our students in the emerging level for early literacy. And as we progress, this year is the first time we've managed to have all of our students work through that first level. So they are actually all considered readers. All of our students are able to decode and read. Um, I guess the biggest thing in working through that is each year we were going through the program, in our discussions, we would very much record and highlight the strategies that were most effective and that were working. And then we would eliminate or not focus on things that weren't. And so each time we go through the program, the teachers become more effective at either early diagnosis or early intervention or knowing exactly what tool and what step to use at a particular location. So it creates an efficiency in the class, more time in the class. And we're always focused on single student gains. So when we show the entire data like this, when we're talking in our collaboratives about what our steps are, the goal setting is really on individual student movement in a very short time span. We look at it week to week or even a couple weeks at a go.
Thank you, Steve. Would you like me to put your class up that you're going to reference, or?
I can talk about a few things on the way, and then I'll talk about what this actual data profile looks like for a class. Um, so we have 1 hour of set time a week to do a collaborative meeting, which is done online. We also have our own time during the week where teachers meet with me one-on-one, or we have in between discussions about what's going on. In our collaborative, data is always a topic. And we try and review at least every other time. We try and go through our student lists to make sure that we don't miss anyone. So it's very, very individualized and student focused. If you go back to the data slide, so when you look at
Steve?
the second one you had up, the one that had Twilight, that one. Is that one? Well, this one will
This
work.
is the general one, yeah.
Yeah, this one will work. So before a collaborative, when I'm reviewing the data, because I'll always look at it first to get a sense, so I know kind of what questions I would like to ask and which students I'd like to maybe have some particular questions about. I'll go through and it shows the number of times a student has been assessed over in the one column. So you can see progress, right? So if there's a student that hasn't been assessed for a long, long time, it gives a window into looking at, well, have they maybe not have been attending, or has there been some issues with illness, or what a reason would be. It gives the data the last assessment. So current assessment, probably the key to this kind of data and having it inform instruction in a real way is having data that's timely. So, a benchmark in September isn't going to really yield any instructional information to a teacher in February, right? That span is too long. It may inform a division, but at the teaching level, it really doesn't show much. So we like to check to make sure that at the very least monthly, and often our teachers are pretty good about doing more than a monthly assessment in this particular program, so that we're using the data to really change or to focus on what's going on in the classroom. If you go over, I don't know if you can show this, Karen, but if you go over the actual set of challenges, one thing that's really helpful to me is if you hover over a challenge,
Right.
I can do it on my screen. So for example, I'm just going to look at challenge number 6. It's a sound letter correspondence, and it's for 13 basic phonemes. And if you hover it, it windows up and it shows me exactly what the challenge is about. So if I see a student like this one down on the bottom here, we'll say our student Reed has a 2 in challenge number 6. So even though it's 13 basic phonemes, I can see exactly what the 13 phonemes are. And when we talk about that student, quite often the reason that they're not achieving the challenge isn't all 13. It's more like 1 or 2 specific things that they need to work on. And so when we go through the data together as a group, we'll look at things like that and say, okay, now if we break up challenge 6, there's all of these things. Which ones is Reed having a hard time with? Teacher will let me know that, oh, it's actually this, this, and this. Okay, and then I can ask, okay, so what's the plan for the week? How is he going to learn those things in this next week? And typically what our instruction has gone to, we do have a very substantial literacy block in our classrooms, but it's broken up into different components. And so one of the components is an independent practice. And during that independent practice, the teachers are pulling students in either small group or one at a time and doing active mini lessons to reinforce those specific skills. So for example, this student may have a mini lesson on 1 or 2 phonemes that gets repeated for the week, and then the next time they're tested, hopefully they're successful. It really pinpoints what the teachers can work on with a student. And when they get it, those little wins, the student is very happy, they feel very accomplished, and the teacher sees that success, and it kind of goes along.
So Steve, this was a sample we just pulled. It wasn't from your school, but I'm going to move the slide to your school so they can see
Sure.
an actual class that's live right now. I know it's we blanked out the names, so it's a little bit less clear, but this one class is a 2-3 class. I think there was a question in the chat. That sample class was probably a grade 1 class, but this would be a 2-3 class that we're looking at now. That is one we just snapshot today from Steve's school. And all 3 phases, Steve, are represented on the 3 slides, so I can move through them as you want me to.
Okay, so one thing I'll just mention off this one. So this is active data from our class. So there's grade 2s and 3s. For example, if you go down 5 from the top, you see the student that has been assessed 5 times. So using data specifically for this student, so that's a grade 3 student, and this is in the Para 1 challenge, which is typically where our grade 1s are working. So clearly indicates that the student is having some difficulties and challenges. And the fact that it's now gone for multiple years, right? It's very clear evidence that there's a greater amount of support required for the student. So beyond the classroom with the teachers, we actually will use this type of data to then support intervention from our resource teacher or from our clinicians, or even to go down further and use it as part of an ed psych referral to try and get additional help for our students. And I guess in the big picture, you can see that there's some that have gone off the chart, and there are levels of this. So there's students in Para 3 and students in Para 2. So this would be Para 2. So we have about 7 students working their midway through Para 2, and a number of students who are, again, off the chart. They're into Para 3. So when we're talking about using this evidence and this data with teachers, the question that comes up is, this is a single classroom, and if you were going to grade level it, there's probably 6, maybe 5, 6 grade levels of activity going on within this one room. So we can ask very nice questions about how it's being differentiated, what certain students are working on, what the grouping practices are, what the assignments are going to be, things like that, to really see how the teacher is meeting the needs of all those different levels. It's very challenging, but it really shows a good picture of what a really diverse classroom looks like.
Steve, as the administrator that would meet with this teacher, would you be able to support, her understanding of small group instruction, for example, based on this data? Obviously, as you said, there's a lot of differentiation that has to take place. So what is what is the principal's role in making sure, when a teacher has this diversified a class, that the data is really driving those small group plans, the data is driving that instructional plan? What's your role in that as a principal? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
A little bit. The role is definitely supportive. So the first thing is to have, of course, have the evidence to go with, and see where everyone is at. In supporting this teacher, we're talking about if there's uses of adaptive technology. We're talking about different ways of breaking the class so she gets enough time with each group to provide the specific instruction. You don't want to limit the students that are the readers in para 3 by having all of the lessons sent, focused on decoding skills that those students have. So it has to match um, where they're at. So we're looking at when students can be out of the classroom, when there can be EA support in the classroom, the different types of resources that she would be using in order to sort of fluidly meet the needs of all of those different students.
So one of the questions in the chat is, was there training offered to the teachers when you started? What did that look like?
So in the initial, probably you would do better than me on this, Karen, but there's two almost like courses that go behind the scenes to this particular program. So there's a Confident Learners program that has modules about best instructional practices, and there's something called the SRI that again is the newer version of those courses. So our teachers went through, and myself as well, went through those courses as we were coming on board with this, and then we were able to practice with the assessments sort of in the real time of putting it actively in the classroom. So we kind of started basically by jumping in.
And I think, as I think about the four, like as you said, 4 years now, I think we're always trying to help those teachers become better instructors, right? And so as we see the data change, as like when we started, we wouldn't have had a class this differentiated. You would have had, more of your students starting out in phase one, obviously, and as time's progressed, and the students have grown in their literacy skills, the spread has happened. So there is a constant need, I think, while you're using your data as a leader, to continue to think about what is the next PD step for our teachers. So over time, I think we've introduced more small group instructional discussions, more ways to kind of look at what those challenges say the students need to know and what do teachers need to know about that instructional piece. So I think it's been a work in progress. Would that be fair to say as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else, Steve, you want to add about just in general how you've, kind of become a really good person in terms of a teacher being able to ask you about their data or listening? I think thoughtfully what I see is that you take the time to know your data, so then when you sit down with a teacher one-on-one or with your teaching team, you certainly are able to have that discussion with them. Does that feel like your confidence has grown in that as well?
Certainly. I find myself knowing what to look for more. We do class observations as often as we can, and we get to see lessons. So it's nice to be informed before walking in. So I like to see what a class looks like before I'll go and do an observation. And I like to be in the know when we're having our discussions, just to be able to ask questions that are maybe more effective or pinpointed on a couple of students that we're really working on. So it has that, I don't know if the word is confidence or if the word is understanding, but it gives you a very clear picture of what's going on in terms of literacy in your classrooms. I wasn't trained as a literacy teacher during my teacher training. I was a high school trained science, math type teacher. And so going through the program as an admin, now that with an elementary school, I've learned a tremendous amount of what early decoding looks like and even just the language to be able to discuss it properly with my teachers, which has been very, very helpful. So I guess that is an understanding and confidence boost for myself. Um,
All right. Thank you, Steve. I'm just going to click through there. So Steve's going to be right here, and so am I. And I know that there have been a couple questions in the chat, but if you'd like to unmic, and I think there's 33 people online here, so we have a small enough group. If you wanted to unmic or put something in the chat, we would like to answer questions. If you have any thoughts around this reflection that's in the box, I just wanted you to think a little bit about, do you have the data you need? So I think that's one of the things as a leadership coach I bump into sometimes. Principals and division leaders, school leaders are just struggling with where to start. You know, which data do I pull to start with? How do I get to that place where I know the data I'm using is the data I need to use? And lots of times it can be quite overwhelming. So we'd like to just kind of think about that or answer any questions that you might have. So I think I see one hand raised. Liza, would
Aliza,
you,
hi.
Lisa?
I have a question. So I'm in Ontario, and we've just brought in the early years screening assessments, and so we're required to assess everybody K to 2 once a year, and if they didn't succeed, if they didn't meet the benchmark, we have to assess them again, let's say in March. And in my school, I'm sort of trying to encourage people to progress monitor or to, do some sort of assessments, in between that time,
Right.
especially for those kids who didn't meet benchmark. But there's always the arguments about time, and your assessment seems much more sort of detailed than what we're doing. And so I wanted to know um, how you sort of look at that in terms of the time that it takes, or how you convince teachers that it's worth the time that it will take, um, that sort of thing, because that's an ongoing issue for us.
That's a great question. And I think we have the right principal here to answer it because if I remember correctly, Steve, you were the one that kind of started saying um, something to your teachers, and I might not say it exactly how you said it, but when the student's ready, I want you to progress monitor that student. So it wasn't meant to be, we're going to take a whole day and do 30 students today, but as the student is ready, we're going to do that progress monitoring. And I know he's created time other ways as well. But Steve, what advice would you give for that question?
it sounds like you're talking about our school when we first jumped on board. It's exactly, and it still comes up all the time, is how long the assessments take. Um, the para assessments that we do, if they're doing a single challenge, it's done on online, and it can be as quick as 5 to 7 minutes for a student, or some of the more advanced challenges take a little bit longer. The question that I asked our teachers when we first came on is how do you really know, like, how do you really justify what you're doing for the class? Like, do you have solid evidence? As opposed to just experience that says this is where a grade 2 class is supposed to be, so this is what we're going to be working on. The assessments are like the assessments create the data. The data is the key piece. So we had to start by doing the assessments, and we had to make that part of the practice. Once we had the data and we realized how valuable the data was and how we could use it to inform those next little steps, and then by extension, once the students were doing those next little steps, how quickly they were being successful, then it reinforced the idea of the practice that the data is actually, it's worth investing that time. Now we have a pretty creative approach. So I have 3 teachers that are involved in this. So we have a grade 1-2 class, a grade 2-3 class, and a grade 3-4 class. Each one is roughly just under 20 20 students. One's a little bit over 20 students. So we've done the math a number of times on how much time for every student to do 25 assessments in each level for each class. It takes, more time than anyone has. So what I would ask is, I would ask at our collaboratives, I would ask, okay, who's ready? Who do you think's made some gains? Who's ready to be assessed, and see if they've moved? And we just started by picking either, 1, 2, 3 students each week that showed that they were, ready to maybe move to the next level, or to show that they've grown. And we'd try and carve out time any number of ways within the building. So it could be that I cover class for a little while. It could be that we get an EA to cover for a little while we can do an assessment, or, during a different program, one student stays to have their assessment done. If we're lucky enough to have our ELA coach visit the building, then the ELA coach can take the class and the teacher can do an assessment. So we find any avenue to gain those minutes to get the assessment. And then we just try and keep cycling through the students to make sure that we're seeing that growth. We've had some pretty creative approaches to it.
And I was going to say, it's been a real work in progress for you. I mean, there have been times where your teachers have pushed back a little bit on the amount of time it would take to continue to progress monitor. I think as they've seen success, they've understood the benefits of knowing where their students are at. They've been able to target their instruction a little better. They've been able to, really dig into what a student knows or doesn't know. So the more they've done it, probably the easier it's been for them to understand the benefits. But until you get into that data cycle, it's harder to get people there. There's no question. Thank you so much for that question. Appreciate it. Simon, are we just about out of time? I know you're my timekeeper, so.
Should have about 12 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions for Steve? Any other questions for me? We're happy to answer them. All right, well, I'm going to just add a couple points here. We definitely see the benefit in school improvement work when we get evidence-driven and creating more teacher confidence. So that collective teacher efficacy, that self-efficacy. So, what Steve's describing at his school is a journey he's been on, and a journey of growing teachers and growing students. And the more times that the teachers were able to clearly see what they did well, so where they were having success, because they were progress monitoring so often, they could see pretty quickly when their instruction's working. So as we think about growing teachers and that teacher efficacy and having, teachers who are confident in their instructional plan, teachers who are confident that they can create the right small groups, that they can pick the right engaging activities. We know how complicated being a teacher is today with, so many pieces that kind of have to fit into that puzzle. So we have inclusionary classrooms, we have strong evidence about the use of good instruction and what a difference it makes. So there's lots of pieces that we want to make sure are working. Creating that teacher confidence is really foundational in having student success. And a big piece that I see happen is when the teachers can see those small wins, they see quick wins, they see their data change, they see a student do something they couldn't do a week ago, and because they're checking on it, they're checking for understanding and they're continuously progress monitoring, that data is driving that confidence up. And so we do it, individually with teachers. And then when we have the ability to do it collaboratively, as Steve's describing, then you build that collective teacher efficacy. So a team of teachers grows in its confidence to meet the needs of students. A team of teachers celebrates the success they see in their data. They see the school grow, they see the students grow, and really does, it's all, it does all align and it's interrelated. So I think it's really tough when you're thinking about changing school culture, trying to build that efficacy and build, capacity within your system, whether it's a system, a district division school, even a classroom system. It's really tough to do if you're not really keeping an eye on what's working and what's not working. And so driving those changes should be coming from that evidence that you can see. So I just wanted to link that before we go today, because sometimes we talk too much about data as a separate kind of an island over here, but not really thinking about the impact that can have on other pieces of school culture that are really, really important, and definitely see the use of evidence in there. Any questions for us? We'd love to be able to help you out. Anything you want to put in the chat, anything at all that Steve could expand on, anything about a school you want to know? We're all good. We always leave a few minutes for Q&A. All right. So I'll leave you with this. It's that what will you do next question. So we always want to think about that self-reflection. So what can we do differently? You've attended a webinar, you've taken time out to take, to take some time for yourself, for your own leadership growth. Really want you to just think about what would you do next? Is there a place where you can spend some time looking at some data, kind of getting to know what the patterns are? Is there a place where you want to build more understanding in your own your own system, what data you're missing, where there are places you're not sure you've got enough data, or just how to start having some of those intentional data conversations. So how do you help that conversation grow as a leader? Find the time. I think time's the biggest challenge for most leaders that I work with. So how do you carve out that time? And maybe just as a last comment, Steve could comment on that. How do you find the time, Steve? You're a teaching principal. How do you find the time to just have those data conversations with your teachers?
Well, we have to schedule it most often, and we make it a priority. So on the day we have our collaborative, it's a little bit of an unwritten rule in our school that people do their best to not book dental. They don't book any appointments, that we have our people available. So we really make probably one of the largest indicators for student success is going to be success at literacy in early years. And the quicker they can read, the quicker that they're supported in that journey, the better it's going to be across the board for our students. So collectively, we make that our mission and our goal. So we find the time. If it's on my calendar, we have other things that just need to wait. So if there's things that come up, it's okay if they wait for a few minutes and we have a teacher conversation about literacy, or if someone has to wait 10, 15 minutes while I finish an observation, then that's okay. They can do that and they'll be fine. So we carve out parts of our day. A lot of the day can get used up doing things that are less significant. So we just make that our key priority.
Thank you, Steve. All right. I see some chat ideas there, and you're right. Steve mentioned following up with students, being able to see it quite quickly and see who needs that follow-up. But the more any data set you use, the more specific you can get to that student by student, skill by skill piece is going to give you the opportunity to really do that follow-up work. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're taking you away probably from your class, because I think you teach in the afternoon there in Manitoba. So we really appreciate you joining and sharing your expertise. He's very humble, but his school, the leadership has made a huge difference at his school, and driving those data conversations I see as one of the exemplary practices that we definitely see there. So thank you so much. And Simon will follow up with anyone who asked in the chat about getting more information. We're happy to do that as a TLB team. And we're here to answer any questions as well. So thanks for your participation. Thank you for your chat. In the chat, we love seeing that, and also for unmiking and having a little bit of a discussion with us. Have a great morning, afternoon, wherever you are, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen, for the invite. Really appreciate it. It was nice to visit and talk with everyone today. Thank you.
Thanks,
Steve.
Steve.